Hi everyone, today my buddy Jalen will be defending Dirk Nowitzki in the argument on who is the greatest power forward of all time, while I, Martin Bautista, will be defending Tim Duncan. Alright, let's get started. Why do you think Dirk Nowitzki deserves to be the greatest power forward of all time?
Well, when you look at the things he can do compared to other power forwards, he literally revolutionized the game. He invented the shooting big man.
The shooting big man, okay. That's arguable with Tim Duncan as well, with his legendary hook.
Tim Duncan had a legendary mid-range shot, but he wasn't really a three-point shooter, and Dirk Nowitzki was probably one of the best shooters of all time.
This is true. In his career, he had like a 0.37% chance of making it, while Tim Duncan had a 0.17. Let's jump into rings though.
Rings.
Tim Duncan had 5 rings compared to Dirk having 1. Why do you think that is?
I think Tim Duncan probably played with 5 or 6 Hall of Famers, whereas Dirk might have played with 1.
Okay.
We had Tony Parker, who was in the prime of his career. We had David Robinson. We had Kawhi Leonard, Manu Ginobili. There's more, but who's really counting, I guess, at this point? Dirk Nowitzki played with maybe a pretty good Jason Kidd, okay Steve Nash, maybe.
Hey, don't disrespect Steve Nash like that.
I won't, my bad.
All right. Now let's talk about impact on the sport. So, Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki pretty much have I wouldn't say a similar style of playing, but it was a similar loyalty that they had. Also, after their careers in basketball, they both started fundraisers, and it was very similar. It was for helping young kids with illness, mental illness, stuff like that. Do you think one has had a bigger impact on the sport overall, and not so much just on the sport, but in general, and even in today's day?
Yeah, I probably would say Dirk had a bigger impact on the game of basketball. Him being a foreign-born player at the time wasn't as common as it is now. It's still not super common, but on the Mavericks today, there's a player born in the same city as Dirk Nowitzki, and he'll talk about him for days, talk about how he inspired him, and that's really a common theme among European players.
Okay. All right. So you did mention earlier that Tim Duncan had better players overall, but why is it that Tim Duncan had 2 season MVPs while Dirk Nowitzki only had 1 season MVP?
It's an interesting thought. I'd like to liken that to something like when you've got a player playing at the highest level of the sport, having other players that are on his level make the game easier. And maybe a defense might not have to focus as much on Dirk Nowitzki if you had a Kawhi Leonard or if you had a Tony Parker to help him out.
Okay, that's fair. All right, and then Finals MVPs, Tim Duncan had 3, Dirk Nowitzki just had 1.
Dirk only made 2 finals, so he had a 50% Finals MVP rate. Tim Duncan made 6, 7.
I believe it was 6. I'm not too
6.
sure, but they did play in the same era. Tim Duncan was drafted in 1998 by the Spurs and then retired in 2016. Dirk, 1999 to the Mavs. In 2019, that's when he retired. So they did play in the same time.
Right.
Would you still argue that Dirk had a more successful career, or do you think Tim Duncan had a more successful career?
I think it depends on how you define success. If we're talking just straight number of wins, obviously I think Tim Duncan had a more successful career, but I think you have to look at all of the factors around that to say who really played better during that time. And I think Dirk did.
Okay. Let's move on to coaches.
Coaches.
So Tim Duncan did have the greatest coach of all time.
Probably the greatest NBA coach of all time.
Yes, and he was definitely groomed by him to be the player that he is, obviously.
Absolutely.
Do you think the coaching in Dallas impacted Dirk Nowitzki's play style?
I think to a certain extent. I think the Mavericks struggled with finding a coach to help Dirk Nowitzki out, and once they did, that's when you started seeing some wins. But even at his height, I think Rick Carlisle probably wasn't as good of a coach as Greg Popovich was. the Mavericks just never found a coach at the greatest coach of all time level.
Okay. Now, do you think that the greatest coach of all time also has to have some of the greatest players as well? Because he could have just you could say that it was because of the coach that Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, all these other guys are greats as well. It's because of Greg Popovich.
Right. Yeah, I think an argument could be made that a great Hall of Fame coach could help make Hall of Fame players, but I don't think that they necessarily became Hall of Famers because of them.
Okay.
I think it helped, maybe.
Okay. All right. Who do you think Dirk Nowitzki has influenced the most? Like, play style wise, who do you think imitates him the best to this day?
I think there are a couple. Playing today, there aren't a ton. I think, players like Kristaps come to mind, maybe Jokic. But they all do different things so well. Andrea Bargnani is a really key one that I think. Gallinari. These tall Europeans that can shoot, can play defense, can rebound, and can score in the post. I think they all kind of modeled their game after Dirk Nowitzki.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I believe Tim Duncan has both of them actually were both very loyal. I think Kawhi Leonard could have been that guy that would have been just like Tim Duncan, just as dominant, even though he wasn't a big man like him. But I believe that he would have stayed loyal with the Spurs. Greg Popovich could have made him the next top 5 player of all time.
I think the Mavericks never had to deal with anything like that. Dirk Nowitzki never had anybody. I think if the Mavericks could have kept Steve Nash, maybe he would have been that Hall of Famer that he is to a certain extent, but maybe he would have been a little clearer, maybe on Tony Parker's level.
Okay. Now we've been talking about offense. We've been talking about shooting. You said that Dirk Nowitzki is a better shooter. Let's talk about defense. So Tim Duncan was pretty dominant on both sides. He could score. He was a very, very good defender. The stats that's showing in front of me is showing all defensive first team. Tim Duncan 8, Dirk Nowitzki 0. Why? So what's the argument about Dirk Nowitzki being greater than Tim Duncan if he couldn't play on both sides of the court?
I think that one might come down to scheme a little bit, personally. I think the Spurs coaches had a lot of defensive plays and defensive sets that kind of got the ball handler off balance going towards the rim that would help Tim Duncan get a lot of blocks. And I think Dirk Nowitzki just wasn't asked to play that role. I think, if you look at their best teams, they have, they always have this big, imposing shot defender. The Mavericks championship team had Tyson Chandler. When he wasn't there, they had Brendan Haywood. They had Eric Dampier. And, Dirk's a little skinnier. They don't necessarily want him down there banging his head against a brick wall. I think they asked him to step out, not necessarily because he couldn't, but maybe because they didn't want him to. Maybe they wanted him to play those 20 seasons as opposed to Tim Duncan's 16.
Okay. Well, I believe that both players were very dominant players in their era anyways. Are you still convinced that Dirk Nowitzki is the greatest power forward of all time?
I think I am.
I think I have to disagree. Thank you, guys.